Hello everyone. For today's lesson, we'll be looking at a few transformations of functions, specifically linear and quadratic functions. So to begin, you'll need to turn on your calculator and go to the y equals screen. The first function we will look at is y equals x. So we're going to push the x, and to see what this function looks like, we will go to the graph screen. So as you can see, when we graph y equals x, we get a linear function. So let's practice some transformations and see what we can get. So going back into the y equals screen, push your down arrow to get to the second line. Let's go ahead and look at what the graph of x plus 5 looks like. We push graph again, and we still have our original y equals x line, but now we have a second line that is very similar. It is just shifted up by 5 units. So going back into our y equals screen again, if we want to look at a different transformation. So we saw y equals x plus 5 shifted up, so let's look at y equals x minus 5. When we graph that, our original y equals x shows up, along with a new line that is now 5 units below the original y equals x. One other transformation I would like to look at with a linear is what happens when we push this in as a negative x. And when we graph that, our original y equals x and our y equals negative x is still a linear line. It's just got an opposite slope. When we continue, we can look at a y equals negative x plus 5, and the same thing is going to happen. We are going to have it shifted up 5 units and with an opposite slope. That is about wrapped up for what we were going to be talking about with linear transformations. So go ahead and clear out your screen and let's look at the quadratic function. So to enter the quadratic function, we're going to enter x, and then we have a little squared button right above the log button, and that will give us our function y equals x squared. And the graph of that is a parabola. So looking at our first transformation, if we want to look at that same y equals x squared along with y equals x squared plus 5. Let's graph that one. So very similar to our linear function, we now have a parabola that is very similar to our first one. It's just shifted up 5 units. So again, if we change that plus to a minus sign and we graph again, we'll have our original parabola along with another parabola shifted down by 5 units. When we're looking at these parabolas, though, we have another option that we can do. We can now shift in a parentheses and we can say x plus 5. And then we can square the entire thing. So when we look at that, we get our original parabola, and we now get a parabola that has been shifted to the left by 5 units. When we change that plus to a minus sign, oops, is x minus 5 squared, and we graph that, we will have a parabola shifted to the right by 5 units. And again, we should have a very similar feature when we do our negative x squared as well. Oopsie daisies, I clicked the wrong function. So let's go ahead and clear that out. When I do negative x squared and we graph, we get a parabola that is just flipped upside down and opening downward now. And again, when we shift by adding 5 on here, it should shift up by 5 units. And you can see that it does. Then when we change that to our minus, it should shift us down by 5 units. And our last transformations are inside the parentheses. So we're going to put the negative on the outside of the parentheses, and we'll say x plus 5, and then we'll square the entire set of parentheses, and we will graph. And we again get a shift 5 units to the left and flipped upside down. And our final transformation, we're going to change this to a minus sign, graph again, and we get a parabola shifted to the right 5 units and opening downward. So this has just been a very brief introduction to some transformations of functions and what they look like when we actually plot them. For our next lesson, we will be going into how to write these equations and how to recognize exactly what these equations mean without having the visual right in front of us. Thank you.